My parents met in Washington, D.C. in 1982. They were both working at homeless shelters in Northwest in D.C. For those of you not familiar with Washington, D.C., Northwest is like a pretty tough area. And the 80s were not a great time for tough urban areas in America. D.C. is no exception. So they were working at these homeless shelters, and these houses were just chock full of people, not full of a lot of cops. I don't know. It's a real rough side of town, so to speak. My dad worked at a house called St. Benedict's, and my mom worked 2 doors down at a shelter called the Mary Harris House. And at times, they were the only people working at these houses. And there were 18 women staying with my mom, and there were 32 homeless men staying with my dad. And both of these houses are Catholic worker houses. I should make a little clarification here for people who don't know the Catholic worker. It's very non-institutional. These are literally like houses that have 32 people in them or 18 people in them just staying so they won't be homeless. So one night, a guest comes to the house named Pat Robinson. And Pat came to Mary Harris' house. And a lot of these guests, people oftentimes when they think about homeless people have some stereotypical ideas. Pat was actually a graduate of Harvard University. She was 28 years old, and she'd come to the house. She was very articulate, very nice, and she needed a place to stay. So she starts staying at Mary Harris' house. Everything seems copacetic. But then one night, my mom is asleep on the couch because there's 18 people in the house, so every bed is full. And all of a sudden, Pat gets up and she's pulling out pots and pans from the pantry, just clanging around the kitchen. And it's like 12:30 at night. My mom gets up and she, another guest has asked my mom, like, hey, can you tell Pat to cut it out? We're trying to sleep. It's really late. So my mom gets up, she goes to Pat, and, she's trying to ask her to do her cooking in the morning or something, no midnight snacks. But Pat gets really irate. She starts yelling at my mom. This is where the story will have to be censored for profanity. Use your imagination. There's some stuff about my mom being white, and she's saying, you're only going to be here in the ghetto for a year, and then you're going to go back and write your book. That was like signature line that Pat was delivering at my mom. And another guest comes to intervene. Pat takes the frying pan. She goes to swing at the other guest. My mom steps in the way. She gets clocked in the head. So my mom is cocked upside the head by Pat Robinson, who's now full force raging at 1, 2 in the morning. The argument continues and escalates all night long until eventually my dad comes to the house at about 6 in the morning. And just as my dad comes from down the street at St. Benedict House, Pat is storming out the door. And she's leaving, and my mom is not long behind her, and she's all bruised and pretty beat up. My parents, I think, were just dating at this time. So my dad's a little concerned, and yeah, to say the least, he's a little concerned, and my mom is in rough shape. And my dad says, well, there's this retreat happening tonight at Holy Cross Abbey. Why don't we get out of town for a night? And this just shows you how low-key these shelters are, that they basically both just ditched. And there was no one running the homeless shelter. It was just kind of whatever, open house. So they were gone for a night. And it's a good thing they took the night off, because that next night, Pat Robinson came back to Mary Harris' house. And when she came back, oh man, I had to speed this up big time. She had a big steak knife. She slashed up the whole house, cut through the TV, through the curtains, and was just yelling and yelling, where's that? My mom, etc. So again, my mom's freaked out. I'm gonna speed up the story here because I'm already over 4 minutes. My parents come back. They have a couple extra people stay at the house, but Pat doesn't show up again. A couple days later, they get a call from a hospital. The hospital says, Pat Robinson was a patient here. She's severely schizophrenic. She's prone to violent outbursts when she's not on her meds. They're like, oh, wow, thanks. It's 3 days too late. 2 days later, they get another call, same hospital, really lax. Pat Robinson was a patient here. She just escaped on a day pass. So she had gone out of the hospital and she's on the lam. So again, my mom is kind of worried. 2 years later, my parents get married, 1984. Pat Robinson does not show up in the intermediate 2 years. And they decide to move to Worcester. Tom Lewis lived up here. They both liked Worcester very much. And by now, my mom is pregnant. So it's April in Worcester of 1985. My parents are walking on Main Street. And all of a sudden, they see Pat Robinson at the end of the street. And they're just like, what is going on? And it's my mom and dad together. Pat comes up. She's totally nice. how are you guys doing? My dad's like, oh, we're doing okay, we gotta go. And then she's like, where are you guys living? And my dad's like, oh, we live around, kind of just like sidling out of the conversation. And they just eventually like leave. But my mom gets really freaked out. She's 8 months pregnant now. As you can assume, it's 8 months pregnant with me. And she starts having these dreams about being beaten up by Pat and the baby, losing the baby, getting like punched in the belly and the baby dying. So 2 weeks later, my now 8.5 months pregnant, really like coming on. She's at the old Worcester Public Library. And the new Worcester Public Library is really nice, but for those of you who remember, the old one had these like long stacks that were kind of dark. And my mom is at one end of these stacks, close to closing time, when all of a sudden, Pat Robinson, right on the other end of the stacks. And this time it's just her and my mom. And my mom has the, you know, fight or flight instinct, I guess, so she gets a little freaked out. She sees Pat at the other end. But Pat just like makes a beeline straight for her. And they start talking. And this time, they end up having a longer conversation. And in the course of the conversation, Pat sort of apologizes for smashing my mom's face with a frying pan. My mom sort of makes a concession that, you know, you were right on some level, my poverty is always going to be voluntary. My mom comes from like a pretty rich family in the South. And then they get to talking about the pregnancy. And Pat is asking my mom, how's the pregnancy? My mom says, it's pretty good, but my feet hurt all the time. And Pat says, well, you should really get that checked out, because if you're pregnant, swollen ankles can be a sign of preeclampsia. And preeclampsia is a condition that can turn into toxemia, which is fatal to both the mother and the fetus. And my mom's like, okay, thanks, whatever, let's wrap this up. I don't want to get punched in the face again. It gets wrapped up. My mom goes home, she tells my dad. And my dad says, you know, we had a prenatal visit just 5 days ago. I don't think we need to go to the doctor again, but whatever, let's go check it out. And Pat had mentioned that high blood pressure is also a sign of preeclampsia. So my mom goes up to St. Vincent's, another Worcester landmark that's no longer here. They take her blood pressure, and it is really high. And the doctors say, it's probably nothing, but we're gonna have you lie on your side for 24 hours. I guess that's what they do with pregnant ladies. She lies on her side for 24 hours. The blood pressure is still through the roof. And by now the doctors are like, man, this is probably preeclampsia. So they give my mom some medicine, I think it's called Pitocin, something like that, to induce labor, and then she gets rushed in the OR. 16 hours later, I came to Worcester, courtesy of Pat Robinson and her apt medical diagnosis. So in a strange way, this lady who almost killed my mom in Washington, D.C. ended up saving both of our lives, because the attending physician, Dr. Farrisee, and I got these names from my dad in case you want to check my facts, Dr. Farrisee at St. Vincent's Hospital, did say, and I quote, if she had not told you this, both of you guys would have died, my mom and me. And as a testament to my parents, they're still running the Catholic Order on Mason Street today, so Pat was wrong about my mom spending 1 year in the ghetto and then getting out. And I'm here telling you guys the story. So,